Studios Tour Theatre, it's Granada up front. Tonight, fleshly sins or priestly vows. Should Catholic priests be allowed to marry? And as Judith Ward walks free after 18 years, British justice is up front. Welcome your presenters, Lucy Meacock and Anthony Wilson.
Thanks a lot. Hello, good evening. Welcome to Up Front. Tonight, after the freeing of Stockport's Judith Ward, we ask, can we have faith in the British legal system?
And talking of faith, has Bishop Casey's affair and love child shown yet again the need for change in the Catholic Church? Celibacy is also up front.
In a moment, the bishop's earthly love that's rocked the foundations of the Catholic Church.
But first, rocking the foundations of civilization in general, Mrs. Merton is with us again this evening. Hello, Mrs. Merton.
Thank you, Tony.
Nice one. Thanks very much, Mrs. Merton.
Ha!
Now then, the Catholic Church alone among Christian churches does not allow its priests to marry.
The celibacy rule was in fact introduced in the 12th century, and until that time, priests of the Catholic Church, including St. Peter, who wasn't quite a priest but was the Bishop of Rome, they were often married men.
Well, this week the moral dilemmas celibacy brings have been highlighted by the scandal surrounding the Irish Bishop of Galway, Dr. Eamon Casey.
Has the time come for the Catholic Church to re-evaluate its stance on celibacy? Channel 4's Brookside has been screening a powerful storyline portraying the agonizing conflict of conscience a young priest experiences when he is unable to reconcile his earthly love of a woman with the rules of the priesthood.
This is the Lamb of God. Takes away I'm sorry.
Fiction and fact. The Catholic Church has been rocked over the past 2 weeks with the revelation that one of its most senior bishops fathered a child back in the 70s. The American woman he loved, Annie Murphy, says that her affair with Dr. Casey was not a secret.
I'm not a sentimentalist, but it really was kind of love at first sight. I just felt this tremendous feeling. I don't know what it was, but I have never felt that in my life. You could tell, you know, when you see two people very much infatuated, whether you call it love or infatuated, you can see it. On trips from Dublin, Father O'Keefe would be driving, Pat would be in the front, and he'd be in the back kissing me. I mean, what did they think was going on?
Dr. Casey has now left Ireland and has declared his intention to remain in the church, devoting his life to missionary work.
Love, rescue me.
First of all, anyone here upset by Dr. Casey's conduct? Yes.
Upset because he should have resigned 17 years ago. The fact that he didn't makes me lose all sympathy with him. I would have been sympathetic otherwise, but he behaved totally wrongly.
Do you feel that priests should be celibate?
No. And I'm a Catholic.
So it doesn't bother you whether they're celibate or
No.
not? Okay, any other views? Anyone think that it's important that priests are celibate? Gentlemen at the back.
I'm more upset about the fact that he took the money without permission rather than the fact that he had this affair. I think that's one of the issues we should have been looking at in this case.
All right, but tonight we're here to discuss celibacy. Anyone else got a point to make about celibacy in the Catholic Church? Yes?
Yeah, I think priests should remain celibate. I think celibacy rules should remain. Partly because I think you're talking about two very unique and beautiful vocations, and I think to try and combine the two is too much. I really don't think you can totally devote yourself to the married state and still devote yourself as well to the priesthood.
But do you think it's realistic in the 1990s? Celibacy?
The church doesn't necessarily change to suit what's the common opinion. The church has a set belief. It must follow those beliefs, and if that's against the tide, then so be it. The church must remain true to what it truly believes in. That's more important.
Gentleman in blue shirt.
What do you mean by realistic? Can you just clarify that?
Is it realistic to expect someone to have a completely celibate life?
I think it is, yes. I have one, and I don't find it... It's not always easy, but it's not impossible, and that's why I find it difficult to understand what you mean by realistic.
Are you a priest?
I'm not a priest, no.
So what made you choose to be celibate?
I think I chose to be celibate in response to a call to God. It wasn't something I just decided to do, or, funnily enough, talking to the girl who did the comedy slot there before the programme, she said, "Oh, you're celibate?" She said, "By your own choice." I wasn't quite sure how you put it.
So it hasn't been thrust
Any
upon
other way,
you?
it hasn't been thrust upon me. And it's something which may be difficult at times, it's not impossible.
Thank you very much. Lady in the green jacket, you wanted to make a point.
I want to question the young man in the red T-shirt, because he said you can't combine marriage with the ministry. That's what you were actually saying. You can't have a good relationship between these two things. In other words, if you pardon the pun, you can't marry these two things. And then what you are actually saying, you're implying that every Orthodox Catholic bishop and priest, every Anglican bishop and priest, and every other denominational minister is not fully doing his job.
I know we'll be exploring that. We'll come back to that. But I would like to bring in Alex, because Alex was a priest until he fell in love with Jan here.
That's right.
So you've actually had to confront this. Now, tell us what happened. I mean, how did you meet to start off with?
1984, I went to my parish in Kendal, and we almost met immediately. And but our relationship grew imperceptibly, like any ordinary relationship. But eventually, my own integrity was being challenged.
But when did you realise that there was a problem, that there was a conflict there?
Well, when we had to make a choice of the love that we had for each other.
But how close had you got by that stage?
Well, we obviously got very close. And the problem was that my integrity as a priest, as a human being, was being challenged. And I couldn't live that kind of life. I had to make a positive decision one way or the other. I'd have liked to have remained a priest and be married, but the rules at the moment don't allow me to do that.
Do you regret leaving the priesthood?
I don't regret at all. No, I'm fully alive now than ever been before, and it's creating so much suffering and pain for a lot of men in the priesthood, and I think unnecessary pain.
Must have been very difficult for you too, Jan. You're a Catholic.
Yes, I am.
So did you think of it as a sin? You knew he was a priest.
I did think of it as a sin. I felt more guilty though, because A, I was a Catholic, because I knew I'd be hurting people around, our families, our friends, and we did try, both of us, to separate ourselves away from each other. I even offered to move out of the area, but that's running away from a problem. We knew that we had to come together, and to be, Alex had to be true to, what he was saying, what he was feeling, and so did I.
But Alex, there are people who would say that you knew the rules of the club when you joined it.
Right, I mean, and you have the ideals of celibacy, and there are lots of priests who live the celibate life and live it fruitfully, and we wouldn't want to argue against that. Our argument is that I felt called to priesthood, and part of that package deal was celibacy that I took on and prayed that the grace of the sacrament would help me persevere. But unfortunately, the reality of daily living on your own in a parish, with little or no support, in this day and age, is something too much to ask someone who's on call 24 hours a day, ministering to those who need his services.
How much sympathy did you have with Dr. Casey?
A lot of sympathy, and I thank Bishop Casey and Annie Murphy for bringing this whole issue into the public debate. It's something that
I
needed
don't
to
think
be...
he did that intentionally. It
I'm
was
sure
the woman who brought it into the
I'm
public
sure he
domain.
didn't, but even the Holy Spirit can work through the actions of Bishop Casey and Annie Murphy, and it's about time that this debate was tackled head-on, honestly and openly.
Right. Well, that's all we're here for tonight. So let me bring in Father Keith Baltrop. Now, didn't Alex here behave more honourably, though, than Bishop Casey?
I think Alex has behaved extremely honourably, as have many priests who've left the priesthood. I do think, though, there's a tremendous value in celibacy, and the main argument for it, and let's not forget that the Church doesn't say that priests will always, for all time, be celibate, but it says that it's fitting that priests should be celibate because they're supposed to represent Christ, and Christ was celibate so that he could give himself undividedly to people. And if the priest is to represent Christ, then he can be given to people in a completely unique way through celibacy.
But perhaps it was easier for a priest if he was in an enclosed environment, possibly like a monastery or something like that. When a priest is working in a community, he's surrounded by people who are perhaps married, who are openly having affairs and what have you. It must be a lot more difficult.
Well, I'd like to take up the phrase that the gentleman who left the priesthood raised, a very interesting one, a lack of support. I think some priests do suffer from a lack of support, and I think the Church is very much looking at ways in which priests can not only be trained better for celibacy through all sorts of ways, but can also be given more support. And there are many other ways than marriage of finding support.
But I don't think that was where the lack of support came in, was it?
No, I don't think so. I think it's, again, celibacy needs to be freely chosen by those who take on a vocation of priesthood. And that's at the moment, that isn't available to us. You take on the gift of priesthood, and with that comes celibacy, which you then try and use to your best advantage and to the advantage of the Church. And unfortunately, it's becoming a disadvantage to the Church, and it's creating tremendous tensions there at the moment.
Well, I think it's a bit of a myth to think that there's lots of people around who just want to lead a celibate life. And I was delighted to hear the gentleman there who is leading a celibate life. But celibacy, I think, doesn't stand on its own. It comes as part of a way of life in a monastery or in a community with the support of others. And I'd come back to that point that I think to be happy in a celibate life, as many, many priests are, you need to be part of a community of support and sharing.
But let's face it, many aren't, and there is an acute shortage of priests at the moment, isn't there? So isn't it something that worries you?
In this country, we actually still have one of the highest ratios of priests to people in the world, and people don't realise that. We will suffer a shortage if it goes on, but we want good priests, not just anyone.
Okay, let me bring in Father Pat Buckley. You've fallen out of line with the Catholic Church, I know, but I wonder if you could tell me what sort of effect you think celibacy has or can have on a priest.
Well, I mean, I would just like to reiterate what Alex said and what Father Keith has said, that celibacy in itself is a value, and it's one that the Church can retain. But it doesn't mean that all bishops and all priests have to be celibate. I do a lot of work with people that I would call marginalised by the Church. And one of those groups would be priests who had left. And 120,000 priests have now left the Catholic Church worldwide in the last 20 or 30 years. That represents something like 25% of the world's priesthood. We have had 1,000 leave in Ireland, which represents about 1/7 of the priests of Ireland.
And you're saying that's because of celibacy?
Not always, but a lot of priests who leave to get married, and many who leave get married. So that's the first thing, the question of priests, the exodus from the priesthood. The second question is that if priests or bishops or priests are in the Church and they're not able to maintain their celibacy, like obviously Bishop Casey wasn't, you are having priests and bishops who are being forced by their humanity to be in illicit relationships. And this puts unbearable pressure not only on the priest but also on his partner.
But what about the argument that if you have a woman in your life, you have less time to devote to God?
Well, to be honest with you, I mean, I think that's a lot of rubbish. And as somebody said earlier, what about all of the Eastern priests and the good Protestant ministers and Anglican priests that we have?
Okay, Father Baltrop, what is the matter with us women? I mean, what is the Church frightened of? Is it all about sex or what?
I think it's a big myth to think that the Catholic Church has a hang-up about sex. I'll wait for the groan for the audience.
We've got a lot of Catholics in here tonight.
The human race has a problem with sex. It's a very difficult drive to reconcile with living any kind of life of ideals. There's nothing the matter with women. You'll be pleased to know.
I'm pleased to hear that. Okay, who wants to come in? Gentlemen here.
I would like to ask the question, are the entrants into the priesthood too young to make a decision on celibacy? They come from school straight in and have to make a decision.
That's a very good question, but certainly speaking from my own seminary, we're very reluctant to take people straight from school. Many, if not most, of our students have knocked around quite a bit, and you can understand what I mean by that. It's not slightly
Thank you. I know that we have a few Anglicans in here tonight, and Anglican clergy, and I was wondering whether or not there would be as many vicars if your rules were as strict. What do you think?
Well, I think that the Church of England would face the same problems that the Roman Catholic Church is facing in priests leaving and not many coming in. And I know in France that there is a massive shortage of Roman Catholic priests. But I think we've failed to grasp one of the central problems here, which is that in most people's eyes, particularly the laity, and particularly in the Roman Catholic Church, the priest is seen as the embodiment of what it really is to be a Christian. They are the ones who have committed themselves to the church, to the gospel, absolutely and completely. And therefore, the message that that gives out is that somehow marriage, sexual relationships are lesser, secondary. So that no matter how much the
Don't you think that women can be a little distracting?
Well, I'm sure they are, but so can men, you know.
Lucy, I wonder...
Father John, as another Anglican, I'd like to bring you in.
I think we're mixing up two vocations altogether. There's the vocation to priesthood, and a lot of positive things should be and have been already said about that. There's also the vocation to celibacy, and I would want to say, I'm a married man, but I would want to say that celibacy, I would like to say lots of positive things about celibacy. But I mean, you have a situation where in the different parts of the church, I mean, you mentioned the Eastern Church, where it's practically compulsory to be married, to be a parish priest in the East. And not if you're a bishop, because they only choose monks to be bishops. But priests, it's more or less compulsory. And you have, in the Roman Catholic Church, a large number of clergy who are in communion with Rome, but it follow Eastern traditions where they more or less, as I say, have to be married. So you have two different sections within the one
I just want to bring in
denomination.
Gerry Proctor, because I know that you've worked abroad in South America, haven't you? So what was the situation like there?
I think I find it very challenging, first of all, to my own priestly ministry, to be in a culture that didn't prize celibacy, where sexuality was just taken for granted. It was a normal part of everyday life. And then coming up against...
So how did you fit into that, though?
With difficulty. Struggling to be a celibate, to be true to my vocation.
Did they think there was something wrong with you?
I think so, yeah. I don't think anybody believed I was really celibate.
Lucy, I wonder if I could come in on this. I mean, the way our discussion is going tonight, it's almost as if we're saying it has to be either one or the other. Why can't we have the two?
That's a very good question, which I would like to put to Father Baltrop. I'd like to ask our other chap here, though, Father Baltrop, why not both? Why not just give it as an option?
Theoretically, it's possible, and there may well come a time when the Pope and the bishops decide that it should be. But recently they have met, and this is not just the Pope on his own. The bishops all together have considered the question. There is debate within the Catholic Church on this question, and they have decided in their wisdom that at the moment it's not the right time to abandon it. I don't think the Church ever takes the easy way out. When things get tough, we wouldn't be respected if we did.
Okay, let me talk to some supporters of celibacy here. I know I've got some here, yes.
Well, yes, qualified anyways. No, I probably am the only one here, I'm open to correction, that knows Bishop Eamon Casey. You knew him quite well. And I'd like to say how, in fact, people like Desmond Wilson, I just saw yesterday writing the campaign manager for the Liberal Democrats, paid a glowing tribute to his performance in terms of his commitment during his active life as a bishop.
Were you shocked, though?
Was I shocked? Oh, yes, of course, yes, yeah. But I would like to say just one thing. It seems to me that perhaps, even though, of course, the episode of Bishop Casey does raise the question of celibacy quite dramatically, nevertheless, sometimes I feel that the fallout from that episode would suggest that celibacy should be done away with. It's like saying that if somebody is unfaithful in marriage, that the whole institution of marriage should be done away with, or if Paddy Ashdown is unfaithful, he has to do away with his party.
But he's only a politician, he's not a bishop.
I know, yeah. It's an analogy, not an exact simile, I agree. But I feel that there is this whole question about celibacy, which has, I think, has been coming through here, properly understood and properly practiced, if it can be lived fully, can be indeed a very liberating way of life.
Yes, but look at the way he abandoned a woman who was carrying his baby. I mean, that's not really something that the Church would condone at all, surely.
I mean, we could go into the sort of chapter and verse of that episode. I mean, well, I suppose you could say in one sense that he didn't leave his ministry and live with her and support her properly.
Was he right?
No, I don't think so, no, I don't think so.
He should have resigned.
I think so. I'm very loath, obviously, to make a kind of a judgment because I'm very conscious of the Christian backdrop to all this when you think of Jesus Christ and his eschewing of judgments and indeed his great affirmation of women in the Gospels, and to feel that I would come and say he was this or he was right or wrong, I would be very diffident about that, but my inclination is to say that he should have retired. Yes.
Thank you. Okay, look, it's even something that's hitting the soap operas now, because I know a lot of you will recognise the gentleman up here at the back, Father Derek, as we've come to know you, Clive. Now, in tonight's episode, just in case anyone missed it, Derek was thinking about moving in with his girlfriend, Margaret. Now, Clive, how difficult a character has that been to play?
It's been, well, I'm not a Catholic, so I've been seeing this whole afresh, the old church. It seems it's been difficult putting on all these layers of guilt that every Catholic seems to have. And I've just realised that it comes across as a very authoritarian church that, in a way, puts on this guilt and is sort of scared of women, in a way. It's
something that we actually put in Wednesday nights.
Mal produces the programme.
Yeah, it's my fault, unfortunately.
Blame Mal.
Something that we actually made sure was in Wednesday night's episode was where he said, my vocation is to God before the church and not a set of man-made rules. And we emphasise the word man, not God-made rules.
That's a very important point, Mal, because there is nothing in the Bible, is there, which actually says that you have to be celibate as a priest.
Lucy, I just wanted to mention this point to you. I think one other aspect that perhaps missing out tonight is the historical aspect. And St. Peter, as somebody said earlier, was married. For the first 12 centuries of the church, the bishops and priests were married. Some of the bishops passed their priesthood to their sons.
In fact, the canon came in 325, the Council of Nicaea. In the Dark Ages, there was a collapse of authority and a collapse of practice in all spheres of life, and the thing fell. But in fact, it came in the second canon of the Council of Nicaea.
So another supporter of celibacy, the lady in the green jacket.
I actually think that the Catholic Church, there was a gentleman down here who said that we aren't short of priests. I think that celibacy is measured in degrees because actually in other parts of the world there are married priests. If they were married before they took the vocation, they are allowed to continue being married. Why is it measured in different degrees? Why are you supposed to take a vow of celibacy if you also want a vocation?
I'd like to bring in MARCEL in front of you because this is a young man who's thinking about going into the priesthood. Now, do you want to see these rules changed?
No, I don't actually.
Why not?
I feel that celibacy is sacred. It is a gift from God, and we do need, as a priest, you do need the grace from God to maintain it.
Doesn't it ever cross your mind, though, that, I mean, it's all very well now.
Yes,
but
or
many
30 or
years
40
hence.
years later, or whenever I am 40, or 50.
Oh, it's years away.
Every human being is tempted, and that, one needs to trust in God and just persevere, I think. And also that I think we ought to keep in mind also that the early saints reminded priests that when celibate, they were reverencing the flesh of Christ. Now,
I'm getting very short of time, and I would like to hear Father BUCKLEY's response to that, because here's a young lad who's quite happy to go into the priesthood with that celibacy rule.
Well, he can be one of our happy celibate priests. The thing about it, Lucy, is that it's not working. We've had Bishop Casey in Ireland. There are many others in Ireland. David Rice, the author of Shattered Vows, which is the work that has studied this worldwide, has said that 100% of the priests in Africa are not celibate, 80% in South America, and 20 or 30% in Europe.
We have to stop you all. Changing the church, changing the judiciary. Thank you for watching. Maybe the weather won't change. Have a nice weekend.
Thank you.
Your Honour, the time is 10 o'clock. We